So I played Daggerfall first and then got hooked and started playing all the other Bethesda games. But Arena at the time, I was like, oh, I don't know, that cover's so goofy. I don't think I could get into that.
You know, after we finished Redguard, the whole team, the whole entire company went downstairs into the basement and we would all package the games up to be shipped out. And that was sort of how things worked back then.
A girl. We've got a daughter, Catherine.
We had to create gun combat from the ground up, something this company hadn't done since the Terminator games. And so that was a big thing. And we knew with gun combat came combat spaces, and that meant designers who knew how to make levels.
But I didn't want to tell them, yeah, I'm actually taking pictures of this so I can blow it up in a video game, which is exactly what I was about to do.
We have a lot of takes of Ron Perlman giving us War Never Changes in many, many ways.
War never changes.
Hello friends and welcome to Rockville, Maryland, home of Bethesda Game Studios, creators of the Elder Scrolls series and proud adoptive parents of the Fallout franchise.
If you've watched our documentaries in the past, you know we like to travel to developers and interview them about the games they've made. But until now, we've never had the opportunity to talk to a team while the sausage is being made. That's why we're here, to talk to the people behind Fallout 76, to dive into the game's design and find out about the challenges and pitfalls they encountered during the game's development. To do this, we spent over a week at the studio interviewing everyone we could, from design to art to animation, QA, marketing and more, all to try and paint a picture of how Bethesda Game Studios make their games. So naturally, that also involves a lot of looking back. Many of the folks working on games here at BGS have credits on their older games too. Games like Skyrim, Fallout 3, Oblivion, Morrowind, and even Arena. Games that have each in their own way contributed to the story of Bethesda Game Studios and their plans for the future.
But before we dive into the studio's exciting future, we've decided to spend some time looking back. We've got quite a lot of ground to cover here, folks, but as it turns out, a lot of Bethesda's history happened in this rather unsuspecting looking office building behind me.
I had gotten Wayne Gretzky Hockey 3 for Christmas from my then girlfriend, who's now my wife. And I looked at the address in the box and it said Bethesda Softworks, and I was like, oh, these guys, they're doing a Terminator game as well. So I said, I'll just drive by the office. And I went to William and Mary in Virginia. This office was on my way. So it's we're right off of 270. And this is the same building. So I remember it was Martin Luther King Day, must have been 93. And I drove and I knocked on the door. I came in, but most people weren't here. It was a holiday and someone kind of out and met me like, who are you? What do you want? And I was like, I love your games. I want to work here one day. And when there was an opening, they finally said, hey, we have something. And I jumped. This is where I wanted to be.
How big was the company then?
20 some people. The development staff was maybe 12. And so this is my 25th year like in my 25th year. So it's been, same building, right downstairs where you came in. That's where I came in.
The original Bethesda Softworks was founded in 1986 by entrepreneur and software developer Christopher Weaver. Named after the town of Bethesda where it was founded, the studio developed and self-published a variety of games. Everything from football game Gridiron to early hockey games, and even some Terminator spin-offs. One of Todd's first responsibilities once he joined the team was to port a CD-ROM version of a role-playing game that had been made internally. Ted Peterson, Julian LaFay, and Vijay Lakshman were spearheading the project, a game that would take the first-person dungeon crawling of 1992's Wizardry 7 and evolve it using more modern 3D graphics techniques. That game had been originally conceptualized as an arena combat game, but quickly grew into something much, much larger.
I think I found out about it because I worked at a software store at the time with a friend of mine in Houston. So we were just employees on the floor. I'm trying to think why we found out about it in the first place, because I didn't necessarily follow RPGs or read Dragon Magazine or whatever. Right. Maybe it was just the box art. I'm sure that was part of it. There's a lot of literature on the back about how it's, I don't know if the term open world was used at the time, but how it's this limitless thing and you can do this and you do that, and that sounded great to me. I always want to just make my own story. And in playing it, thinking about it now, I don't think I ever did anything with the main quest. I left that to some other hero. Now I just want to buy a house and chill. That's all I want to do. Houses are really expensive in that game. I remember that too.
I saw Arena in, the computer game store and looked at the cover and I was like, there's no chance I'm buying that game. I don't know if we should leave that in this, but so I played Daggerfall first and then got hooked and started playing all the other Bethesda games. But Arena at the time, I was like, oh, I don't know, that cover's so goofy. I don't think I could get into that.
It's a strong cover. It's saying something.
It was.
Maybe it didn't speak to you.
It didn't.
It has massive ambition, yet is very, very elegant in my opinion. It knows what it is. It will feel really simplistic to an Elder Scrolls fan now. But in its day, it had, massive scope. It gave you the feeling, despite it being old, of this world is, I could do whatever I want. I could go wherever I want. And that the things you found, you felt were unique, like, I found this, only I did. And this was there for me, and it has the time warp.
By the time Todd had finished his work on the CD-ROM port of Arena, the Elder Scrolls team was already working on Daggerfall, so Todd was made producer of a Terminator game. You have to understand that back in the mid-90s there were almost as many Terminator games as there were people living on Earth. In fact, Bethesda had made a bunch of them themselves. But this Terminator game was going to be different. Terminator Future Shock was Bethesda's first full 3D game. It had a height map, it had instanced 3D objects, and the game took place across large, sprawling levels set in post-apocalyptic cities. Good design practice, as it turns out. About half a dozen people were working with Todd on Future Shock, and as that game was released and Daggerfall was going through its own tough development, many of that team went to help on the Elder Scrolls game.
Because of the state of the project, I did half the levels as well. Did the sound effects. I did the sound effects for Daggerfall. So anything you hear in Daggerfall, the little guys yelping, or all the creatures, a lot of them are me.
Just in a microphone?
Yeah.
At the time, it just felt bigger and deeper than a lot of other RPGs out there. And oddly enough, it wasn't the quest so much in Daggerfall. The story of Daggerfall is kind of thin. It was more about your character and the world you were exploring. All these different dungeons you could go in, how you leveled up through actions, not just experience points. It was just a really different kind of game. It's really cool.
The memory I really have more than anything, because you start off in a dungeon, which I thought was always a strength of the series, to kind of keep you walled in, don't show you everything at once. You really get used to that darkness and the corridors. You get taught about the fighting systems and so forth, and I didn't realize it at the time, but that's great design. Only give you a few tools. Let's give you a hammer, and once you've mastered hammering in the nail, like in Karate Kid, then okay, now we'll show you the wrench and whatever else. So when you finally do make it out of that first dungeon, which is not easy to do without seeing a map of it, you know, you get this whole big reveal and the music changes of the first time. You have suddenly it's all those possibilities.
If Arena is the world, Daggerfall pushes on the character system. So if you look at the two character systems, Daggerfall introduces the whole skill system and the way you level up and the way factions feel about you, and you have languages and you have pluses and minuses. It's a very, very heavy character system, but awesome. A lot of the world stuff stays the same. It has a very sophisticated quest system, despite how it might express itself if you go back and play it. But it mostly becomes a game about pushing the character system much, much further.
Before we start, for the sake of our name bars, can you tell us your name and your job title?
Yes, my name is Ashley Chang. I'm the studio director at Bethesda Game Studios.
All right. You've been here a little while, huh?
I have. I've been here for, oh man, it's 18 years.
Okay.
I was one of two people in the marketing department at Bethesda Softworks. This is the old school mom and pop Bethesda Softworks. And you know, the first thing I ever did when I joined the company was I was mailing out review copies of Battlespire.
Okay.
Mailing them out, by myself, and then calling up all the press going, please play this game, please review this game. You know, Todd and I worked on, I was the PR guy for Redguard, a very, very little known game.
The long lost, forgotten Elder Scrolls game.
It is.
Right?
It's an action adventure game. You should definitely try to find it if you can.
Help! Hey! Quit it! That hurts! Blood! Stand still! Stand still!
And back then, the company was so small, after we finished Redguard, the whole team, the whole entire company went downstairs into the basement, and we would all package the games up to be shipped out. And that was sort of how things worked back then.
It was a mix of like my love of Prince of Persia and Tomb Raider to come out, like real action adventure mashups. Morrowind had kind of been going, but really not anywhere. It was like in a Daggerfall mix, and then there was Battlespire. And a lot of the Terminator team that I'd worked with, we were going to do Redguard. We wanted to do something, and I could see where we got with the engine at the time. Like 3D was still coming online, that we could do something, we can make a much more rich world. Like despite Daggerfall's ambition and Arena's ambition, the detail of the world was lacking for me personally. Like I liked the game flow, like this is what we should be doing. I like the character system, but like I wanted Ultima level detail in the world. I want to break the bread, and I want to move the bottles, and I want to do all these things. And Redguard was a little bit of an experiment in like, okay, how detailed of a world can we build? So the way we built the world in Redguard is how we built the world in Morrowind, just on a much, much larger scale. The other thing Redguard does at the time, also coming off of Daggerfall, we felt the world was generic. It was very kind of bland Tolkien. It had backstory and stuff once you dug into it, but it didn't have something you could look at and say, oh, that's a little bit more unique. But that comes in Redguard, and then Morrowind builds on that. Right? The scope of Redguard was too safe. It missed a technology window. It really should have been a console game. It should have been on the PS2. Redguard did not do very well. It did very, very poorly for a lot of reasons. We made some bad decisions. We made some games that weren't our best stuff. And the company really got very, very small.
Despite the success of the earlier Elder Scrolls games, these spin-offs, Battlespire and Redguard, had struggled at retail and put the company in a precarious financial position. In an effort to avoid bankruptcy, the organization restructured. A new company was formed, ZeniMax Media, which would act as an administrative entity over the games development and publishing wing. A few years later, publishing and development were separated. Bethesda Softworks became the publishing arm, while the development staff had a new name, Bethesda Game Studios. All these entities would live under the same roof, in fact they still do today, but only thanks to the incredible success of their next game.
We need to do Morrowind, do the game that we're here to do, and it's kind of like, this is our last shot. Like, if this one doesn't work, we're not here. I think the failures of the previous games made Morrowind what it was. Because that's where you say, well, we just got to do what we think is right and what our audience wants, and we're already in, like, we already think we're not going to be here, so fuck it, let's just make the game that we think we should be making.
Well, there is a contingent of fans out there who believe, and I actually have met a few, even today, saying that it's the best game they've ever played, it's the best game we've ever made, and it's been downhill since then.
Right.
Like, Morrowind was the greatest game, and a lot of it is because of the tone, the flavor, the art direction, the character, the story in that game, and it was very unique, very, very unique for its time.
Yeah, I think the main idea behind Morrowind was stranger in a strange land. You are in an alien world. And so how do we show that? We had a lot of different influences, and the concept artists who did the work there just had crazy, amazing, weird ideas, and it was awesome. And we borrowed from a lot of things. It felt a little bit like, what would Star Wars be if it was, a fantasy game? And then combining the culture of Dark Elves for all these different influences and how they lived in giant bug shell-shaped houses and wore bug shells as armor and lived in this essentially desert. How did that shape who they were? How did it shape how they built things? How did it shape what you as a player got to explore? It became a mix of a lot of really different and interesting things. A lot of it's based off of, giant fungus, or just strange thorny roots that grow in the ashlands. So it was doing something weird and then playing with the idea of scale. So it's a little bit like Alice in Wonderland. Imagine taking things like mushrooms and scaling up as giant trees. How does it feel now to run around that world? Well, that's pretty cool. I haven't done that before. That's interesting. So I think things like that stand out a lot. They make the world feel really different and not like something you've seen before.
Well, we knew we had to do it, I think. Let me put it that way. The company really wanted to make Morrowind then. But it was the ambition and scope were so big, obviously from the final product, that it took a while. And the team was only about 40 back then.
Microsoft approached us, and they were doing the original Xbox. And it was very PC-like. This would be great. We'll have an RPG. And the other thing is, you need to go back to RPGs of that time, which are like Final Fantasy and other things. And it is, well, we don't really do the RPG that a console crowd wants. Can we translate the menus? Can we keep the experience the same? Can we do a console RPG that we would want to play?
And a game like Morrowind, back then the Japanese RPGs were what everyone loved, the Final Fantasies. That was what an RPG was. Western RPGs weren't really,
Cool.
You could say that, but nobody was making them like we would. Like, this is going to be a first-person experience. It's going to be an open world. You're going to be able to go wherever you want. Like, Morrowind's not going to hold your hand at all. You can break your game in Morrowind, and we're not going to, Morrowind literally tells you what you've done. You're about to break your save. Are you sure you want to go? And we go ahead and let you say yes. We let you say yes. We let you break your game intentionally. That's how open that game is.
It was fantasy, open world, and the idea that you could just sort of wander anywhere and do anything was very, very unique at the time. The streaming system, how the NPCs, how they tried to make it so you could ask any NPC any question, which was great in theory and practice, but the ability to just sort of wander around and do whatever you want in that game. And I remember the first time I came across one of the ruins in that game, and the feeling of exploration was just, your mind was transported into another world in a way that I love video games and gaming, but it was so unique to me for its time. It was just amazing.
So Morrowind comes out, is a much bigger success than even it's beyond what we need. It's a much bigger success than we anticipate, or it's huge, and it's really huge on Xbox. I believe it became the second best-selling title behind Halo. It crushed, because people were hungry for, oh my gosh, have you seen this thing? So that really made it as far as us as a company and a studio. And that was going into Oblivion where, hey, the console part is huge.
Right.
The audience that wants this is much bigger than we think.
Morrowind, in many ways, is responsible for everything Bethesda has done since. Not only was it adored by those who play it, but it established the creative process through which BGS would make their open-world games. The team had good tech, good art, good engine, good storytelling. It was the foundation of a team that still exists today. a team that would gain confidence with each project they took on. And though the team was working under the same roof as their parent company, the financial success of Morrowind gave them enough slack on the leash to go for something even bigger.
You know, Morrowind On is like the second phase of Bethesda. You have like the pre-Morrowind, you get the Arena Daggerfall success and bad things happen and the company's gonna, and then it really there are 6 or 7 of us. And then ZeniMax Media is formed to sort of recapitalize and, hey, what do you guys want to do? That's the other part that really needs to be mentioned, like that business side, to keep us independent and say, hey, what do you need to make Morrowind what you really want? Without that, you know, we probably couldn't have pulled it off. And then so Morrowind On was like this, you know, second phase of the company.
You know, we all worked together, we all moved on to Oblivion afterwards, which is again a big investment for the company. You know, the company, we're like, there's a new generation of consoles coming. We don't know what the spec is. We're going to make this big game. It's going to be a big AAA investment for the company, and you're going to wait 4 years. Is that okay? Actually, that was a very interesting 4 years for us because we were traditionally a PC developer all along, even though Morrowind was on Xbox. It took us a while to really pivot, and it's hard for developers to do this. If you're traditionally a PC developer and you start making console games, like it takes a different mindset. Oblivion was sort of our learning curve. That was our project to learn how to make games for consoles, how to make games run fast and look good, and within the constraints the consoles have.
I remember we were one of the high-level goals, not officially, but we had been talking that, like, if Morrowind was the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the books, right. You know, there's a lot of text, then Oblivion will be the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy. You know, much more visceral, you know, a different aesthetic, more colorful, more, you know, more accessible in a lot of ways.
We were working on it for the Xbox 360 at the time, which was not actually out. So we were working on hardware that was not done yet. So anytime you're trying to make a game, you don't know what the game is yet, and you don't know what the hardware is, that combination can prove stressful. That, and then just how do we, you know, take a huge open-ended role-playing game that's traditionally been on PC. They put Morrowind on console, but, you know, sort of the next evolution of that, and the controls and the feel, and what things you leave in, what things you take out, right, to make it have the, you know, the most appeal, but still keep the depth.
Kind of swing more traditional fantasy, you know, so in Oblivion it's more castles and lots of shiny armor, a beautiful world. Like, we wanted to do forests, we wanted, you know, lots of NPCs, lots of people. They all have, you know, full schedules, they'll eat, they'll sleep.
Oblivion was a very intentional pivot to something more accessible, and this wasn't without a backlash. Some fans of Morrowind saw it as a dumbing down of their favourite RPG. Many elements of the game were simplified. There seemed to be less skills, less weapon types, less factions and diseases. Having voice acting for every line of dialogue meant less speech options. Morrowind had been an incredible RPG sandbox, but with the dawn of HD graphics, Todd and the team had to pick their battles. They wanted a bigger world, they wanted far more detail, they wanted a more simplified interface that would work on consoles. They wanted to bring fantasy into the mainstream, and that meant paring back. But the team was still small, and all this work required to make Oblivion the game they wanted to make wasn't without its challenges.
So the forests for Oblivion were really interesting. We used SpeedTree. We were, I believe, the first video game company to use SpeedTree.
No way.
Yeah, and it worked incredibly well for us. It was great. But what we ended up doing is we used all the SpeedTree assets and we'd bake them out and we'd put them in the game, and we created a procedural generation system. So we generated each area of the game and made it, and it turned out it wasn't so good. So all the artists then basically did like a terraforming pass where we'd go over the procedurally generated work and make it handcrafted, and it took 2 years to do.
Right.
It was an insane undertaking, and we had to really ramp up the team of environment artists to come do that.
Like, we knew what we needed to make, we knew the number of towns, but like, okay, this town has how many buildings, how many NPCs, how many interiors, how many exteriors, like all the details. So it used to be, well, we need a town, somebody make it. And then the artist would go off and make it, and the designer would help design it, and then you'd have your town. So it was really, from that to now, it's, you know, it's very much more designed out as far as how big the town is, how many buildings are in it, what it's made up of. The way we designed the dungeons, some of them were for quests and some of them were more randomized, and then we had the Oblivion realm. So it's like, okay, making dungeons is obviously a big part of this, and it's sort of separated there. And then figuring out how we were going to make all the Oblivion realms. So I remember that as a key part on the schedule. Like we had our game and our date, and we knew what we were doing, but the Oblivion realms, we still hadn't quite figured out what they were.
During this stage at BGS, there was no delineation between designers. Level designers were also quest designers, and as the game got more complex, this was beginning to cause issues. Elements of the game were getting trimmed in an attempt to make the Xbox 360 launch date, and in some cases, to even fit the game on the disc.
So in the shipping game, there's an arena in the Imperial City, and the original plan was there was going to be an arena in every city. And I had done the majority of that work, and we ripped it all out because we realized we needed to focus on one to make it better. That was painful. That was 800 lines of dialogue. That was all the scripting work, and it was definitely the right decision. Absolutely. It was fun to do all the fighting and fight and become the champion, but I actually really enjoy when I play it just betting on a fight and watching and finding all the weird bugs with that. Like, I would set it up so that the two combatants, there would be a Nord woman and an elf guy, and I look at the script, they were always really evenly matched, and invariably one team would always win, and it was supposed to be random, and I didn't know why. And I wasn't taking into account some of like the racial ability. Like Nords are stronger. Right. So this guy was beating the crap out of this person, and I didn't, and so, I had to figure out all that stuff, and
the Khajiits were always losing.
Yeah,
So for us, for Oblivion, compared to Morrowind, the biggest thing is scale. Morrowind's actually kind of a small game, and if you actually look at the draw distance, it's foggy pretty much right in front of the player. We didn't have LOD, there were no mountain views in Morrowind. So for Oblivion, it was, hey, you're in this giant valley, you can see the mountains everywhere, and that's what started the whole, hey, if I can see it, I can go there and explore it. That really happened in Oblivion. That initial view when you come out of the dungeon from character generation and see the world and see the water and see the ruins reflected in it, we spent a lot of time on like the framing of that, how the water looks, how the mountains look, to know that, hey, welcome to this world, go do whatever you want in it.
Elder Scrolls games are like kitchen sink games. There's so many systems, so much crafting, there's magic, there's just all these different systems that have to interact together. There's cities you can explore that are teeming with people.
How are you?
There hasn't been a nuclear annihilation yet. You know what I mean? Like everything's still there, everything's still beautiful.
So we started getting into this thing, we realized that the guards are the best reflection. We started doing this in Oblivion. The guards are the best reflection of the character. So they comment on you, they comment on what you're wearing, your accomplishments, like, hey, I heard you did this thing, or like, and it gets really tough with stuff like the Thieves Guild, or like, did I see you sneaking out of that house? Like.
But in the voice cast in general had not been figured out, other than, let's bring folks back from Morrowind who we like. Michael Mack, the voice of the Redguards and so forth.
You want to be a combatant? Wait, you're serious, aren't you?
Cast a few more people to fill in the space or change up cast from before.
Ooh, look, a fly. Buzz, buzz. Hey, look, everybody, I'm talking to a fly. Buzz, buzz, buzz.
And all in all, it's 10 or 11 actors for what I think started out as it was 60, 70,000 lines of dialogue, and eventually we had to trim that down to 40, 50 or something like that to ship with, because it physically, at the time, we could not fit it on the disc. It was just too much, something had to go.
You're a big, fat liar. Brother Joffrey, he should be in the Priory House, I think. I don't see any good options here.
One actor per race, gender, and some are even shared. The Nords, I think the male Nord and the male Orc are the same guy. And originally they were going to be different, and we had to combine them. And it was just pure disk space, whereas now you could just, we can just tack on another archive that you could download. It's all down to your local hard drive space on your console or whatever you're playing on. So it's a lot of ground covered by very few people. So days and days and days and days and days of just Imperial Male with Wes Johnson, our local voice actor.
In fact, I always forget his name, but one of our voice actors, I see him like once every 2 months at the Dunkin' Donuts down the street. I swear to God, I'm always meaning to say hi to him. I can never remember his name. It's so embarrassing.
And he goes, halt!
And he's great. I'm like, next time.
Oblivion's 4-year development cycle was tough on the team. They had doubled in size trying to keep up with the workload, causing them to miss the Xbox 360 launch by 4 months. But this delay probably only contributed to Oblivion's success. By the time the game arrived on store shelves, console players were foaming at the mouth to get their hands on this game. The scale of Oblivion was something that had never been seen on consoles before, and while some of the Morrowind fans may have felt that the game had been overly simplified, Oblivion struck a chord with gamers in a way that no RPG ever had before. Not only was this a red-letter day for the open-world console game, but it tapped into a love of the fantasy genre that had never had its mainstream moment. You could argue that the release of the Lord of the Rings films had helped, or perhaps they had just tapped into the same thing. Oblivion was a costly venture for ZeniMax Media. 4 long years and a lot of money went into the development of this game, so they wanted a backup. Something else for the team to work on as Oblivion wound down, something they could use all this technology on, but perhaps in a different genre.
Looking toward Oblivion, which was a 4-year gap, 3.5 years, about 4 years, you realize this is going to take a while. You know, there wasn't pressure, but hey, we should probably get more than one thing going, because these things take a while. What would you like to make? And we made a list. You know, it was basically post-apocalyptic. We had some other worlds, you know, science fiction, this, but I could go through the list, but you never know if we'll make them, so I don't want to spoil it. I actually made this logo for the post-apocalyptic game. It was called Apocalypse Road. It's like a road sign that said Apocalypse. And I had written Fallout. It's Fallout. And they said, well, you know, you want Fallout. Yeah, but that's, you know, we don't have that. And somebody here knew someone at Interplay and said, well, I think, you know, they're having a rough time. They're not using it. We might be able to acquire it. And I was like, oh my God, that would be a dream. If you could get that, I'm telling you, this would be perfect here. It fits what we do, even though it's different, but the vibe of the game fits it would fit with our style of game. And maybe it was probably a while. It was a year. Comes back and says, I remember I actually got a sticky note from Todd Vaughn on I can remember it vividly, just a sticky note on my desk when I came back said, got you Fallout, it's yours. It's just like, who does that, like, when does that happen?
Yeah, Fallout was incredibly exciting for everyone here because it was new. New to us. You know, we'd all played the Fallout games before. I think most people here are fans of Fallout 1 and 2. And it was exciting to, hey, we've all been a fantasy group, right? We're making fantasy role-playing games. Let's jump into a post-apocalyptic world. What's that going to be like?
Big fan of those earlier games?
Oh my God, loved them. I think it's genius stuff, you know. All the credit to Tim Kaine and Jason Anderson, all those guys who did that game. That's the other thing. Why don't you make your own post-apocalyptic thing? It's like, well, we could do all this gameplay, but there's a shtick with it, with Vault-Tec and the world of the 50s. That's the sauce. That's the sauce. Even though not every, I know there was a lot of like fan angst, understandably so. I would have been the same way.
If you ever get a chance to work on a video game, work on a Fallout game. You can do practically anything in a Fallout game. Right. And just the breadth of the storytelling, the breadth of the art direction, the tone and the humor. I mean, it's unlike anything else. I mean, when we got it and we started Fallout 3, like that was just, for me personally, I was excited. I was very, very excited to be working on that game.
When it was time for Bethesda to pick a location for their Fallout game, they chose Washington, D.C., and they did so for a number of reasons. First of all, thematically, it just kind of works, right? This is the center of government of the United States. There's a pretty good chance that if a nuclear war happens, this is going to get hit. Second of all, it gave them creative distance from those earlier Fallout games, which were set, of course, on the west coast of the United States. And third of all, this was 20 miles from Rockville, Maryland, where Bethesda is based. This nuclear apocalypse happened in their own backyard.
Well, this is how we make our games. Like when we first decide on a game, we start with the map. And so we started with a map of DC and started mapping out the locations and where everything is going to be.
So I remember Matt Carafano, the lead artist, this was after 9/11, he went down to DC to take reference photos. So he's walking around the Capitol in different areas, looking up, looking down, taking photos, and security comes up like, "What are you doing? You can't do that." And they stopped him. Yeah. He was like, "I'm just taking pictures." I was like, "No, you're not." Yeah, so, but yeah, so a lot of the artists did go downtown, and being right here, it was much easier to do.
So I went down and took a lot of photographs of the Capitol, which turns out is not a good idea to do. I do not recommend doing this. I asked one of the police officers, "Hey, can I take pictures? I make video games. Can I take pictures of the Capitol?" And he said, "Yeah, take as many pictures as you want." And while I'm taking pictures of the Capitol, I realized I'm taking pictures of a very angry guard in the Capitol, and he came out and told me I had to leave immediately and didn't want any questions asked. But I got enough reference to build the Capitol, but I was very careful about not wanting to do that again because it's security risks, but hey, I just wanted to make a cool video game. But I didn't want to tell him, yeah, I'm actually taking pictures of this so I can blow it up in a video game, which is exactly what I was about to do.
And a lot of the concept art for that game was like a ruined Capitol building, which, in like back then and even now is a little iffy, it's a little shaky. And I remember that we bought ads in the Metro and we used that concept art. So you're walking through the DC Metro and you're seeing like this massive piece of concept art on an ad of like this decayed, destroyed, nuked Capitol building. And I was like, are you sure it's a good idea? I mean, I guess.
We knew that the game was set in Washington, D.C. We know what the overall story is, and then we start with the map and looking at where in Washington, D.C. the player is going to go. And so one of the first things you realize when you look at any map, you have a lot of real estate to cover, and you want your quests to take the player all over the place. That sort of naturally involves going into easier zones, more difficult zones, and then we start to, come up with, because we want to tell the story, but we tell the story through the quests. So for us, it was coming up with those quests and how they all fit together and what feels good and what are the core combat beats. When we started talking about Fallout, we knew that we wanted to do something structurally different, and so that structure was a main quest and miscellaneous quest, but no factions.
Oblivion had dozens of joinable factions, but there were 4 main ones: the Thieves Guild, the Mages Guild, the Fighters Guild, and the Dark Brotherhood. And each of these had exhaustive quest lines that took the team significant time to design. So they made the decision to drop faction quest lines, instead incorporating factions like the Enclave and Brotherhood of Steel into the main quest. Perhaps one of the reasons they cut it was a particularly significant design challenge that they hadn't quite figured out yet: gun combat. The original Fallout games were turn-based, using a system known as VATS to aid the player in combat. So the team pulled together a group of designers to help get this turn-based style of combat into their 3D FPS. This group was known as a strike team, so by the time the public saw the game for the first time, first-person VATS had been realized, but it was something that BGS struggled with throughout development.
Well, one of the big things with Fallout, we had to create gun combat from the ground up, something this company hadn't done since the Terminator games.
I had grabbed Emil and said, okay, we need something. It's like Knights of the Old Republic meets Crash Mode and Burnout.
Right.
You drove the board. Like, how do we put these two things together? Right. We messed with some really phase-based stuff, but then it kind of came together. But I will tell you, that was one during the development everybody questioned.
Really?
Well, you can either go like, is this a superpower? Is this just a glory shot? Like, what is the actual, what should the player be feeling, or what's the use of it?
That we went from Oblivion, which had, it was a very robust RPG. It was still very sort of hardcore. We were making the bridge to a more, general player-friendly game, but it was still pretty hardcore. In Fallout, you had guns. And our combat in Oblivion was like, you swung and you're in some kind of distance and you hit, right? And then when you have guns, you have all sorts of different combat mechanics you have to take into account. Very technically, high technical requirements, and there had been many projects that have done first-person shooters, much, not only experienced, but better than we could ever do it. So we were trying to find that balance between how are we going to keep players who love our role-playing games and also make a decent first-person shooter, because those two things don't often mix, and that sort of was VATS. VATS was, part of Fallout. It worked very well within the lore of Fallout. And we were able to make it so, hey, you're not so great at Twitch shooty. You can hit that button, pause the game, see what you want, select targets, just like Fallout 1 and 2, right?
It would take BGS another Fallout game before they'd get the feel for this aim-down sights combat down, but one of the improvements they'd made over Oblivion came from the team's new structure. Designers were now split into two pools, level designers and quest designers. This allowed for the design of better combat spaces, more varied locations, and a lot more variety when it came to quests. It meant that instead of one person taking creative leadership over a chunk of the game, designers were working together to solve problems. What this resulted in was a game packed full of memorable moments, so we decided to ask the team about some of their favourites. Vaults full of Garys, tunnels full of snakes, and much, much more. But seeing as we have to start somewhere, how about we start with the start?
I always love the vaults. Probably every Fallout we do, you'll be coming out of a vault. I like the emerging into the world. And there was an initial idea. I'm usually designing like the very beginning of a game. Like, okay, it's like this. You live your whole life in the vault. And that snapshot of your life as you go through it and then the emerging. I love the beginning of Fallout 3.
Right.
And if you go back, if you played it a bunch, it's a little bit like, I just want to get, a lot of people feel like the game hasn't started, but I love the like, when you step out, you do feel like you live your life in the vault. But if it was just the view, like you see a clip and you look at the view and you're like, it's okay, it's not bad, it's okay. But it's the fact, it's the stuff you did beforehand that make you really feel like the character you're playing. Anytime there's sort of dissonance with that emotion, or I know more than the guy on the screen or whatever, then we're trying to like massage it back.
Actually, we learned from Oblivion. This is when we have a controlled area in the beginning that's your character gen. We're trying to teach you things, get your character made, and then that's the point where we get to set you loose into the game world. And we want it to be sort of overwhelming. How amazing is this? What am I going to do? And we want that vista to be really impressive. So a lot of work goes into how much can you see? Where does your eye lead? Do you think you're going to run down to the ruins? Can you see the LOD for the Red Rocket station? You know, and how am I going to go explore this world? So we try to lead you into it, but then let you go wherever you want. And there were lots of discussions about how the game looked in terms of being a dystopian, post-apocalyptic wasteland. But I think a lot of it really was we wanted this oppressive feeling in the game. We wanted it to feel bad and that you are the hero who's going to come help make this world better. And it was a big jump from the lush forests of Oblivion to a blasted, nuclear wasteland with dead trees everywhere. A lot of the environment artists joke, like, hey, we're not allowed to use the color green unless it's in the HUD. There's no live plants, there's no grass, it's all dead, it's all brown.
Everyone's dead, so you don't want it to feel like too lit, but you also don't want people just stumbling around in the dark, so you have to find like this fine line of like just enough flickering lights that you can navigate and see all the monsters, find like the quest items, so you have to play through every quest to adjust the lighting, like where are the people standing, make sure they have the nice light on them, they're not just like a really bright background in there in the shadow, and then it'll move because like something will change in the quest, so you just have to keep playing it and keep adjusting everything all the time.
Before class, Get out of my way, you stupid tunnel snakes!
I can show you a real tunnel snake, Amata.
Adam Adamowicz, our concept artist who passed away a few years ago. Yeah, he had drawn this concept art. We knew that we wanted, like, I had the idea of there's this greaser gang, and they, they're the bullies, and it's a very 50s type of, greaser gang thing. And he had done a concept image with that exact logo, tunnel snakes.
Tunnel snakes rule. That's us, and we rule.
Tunnel snakes rule is awesome. And by the way, if you're ever online somewhere and you see a guild or a thing that say tunnel snakes rule, that's us. To a T, every time. Awesome. Anytime someone here is making a faction or a guild or a clan or whatever in another game, right, everyone at the studio knows, yeah, it's tunnel snakes rule.
Tunnel snakes rule!
Gary.
That's a classic example of something I had nothing to do with. There was just the level designers. just doing something. They had like, we need a vault, we need an experiment, go.
They'd done all these vaults, and they had this one with all the Garys. And the level designer comes to me, he's like, there's a big deal, we record all the VO, we have to lock it. And he's like, you have this vault with all the clone Garys, I want to record some more lines, just the guy saying Gary. I'm like, they do what? He says, they just say Gary. I'm like, that's the fucking stupidest thing I ever heard.
I remember when we added it. I remember it being, I'm always assembling the scripts before they go off to VO. I think at the time, I always think things are stupid at first. I'm like, this is stupid. All right, fine, whatever.
So you want us to reopen the archives and record Gary over. He's like, trust me.
Gary.
And they go in and do it, and I tell you what, before that is one of the worst levels you'll ever play.
Right.
Can you imagine it without this? But then it goes in, and there's a couple, oh my God, I was so wrong, it's great. I'm like, perfect, I love it. It's hilarious.
Gary! Gary!
We had this nice tower kit that I'd been working on. I was like, this would be really cool. And the designer knew, hey, we want this to be this group of people who thought they were above all of this horrible wasteland would live. So literally we put them above all the wasteland. So they had this really tall tower out in the middle of nowhere. And it, turned out to be the perfect view for, all right, let's nuke Megaton if you choose to do that.
The verticality was interesting. It gave us some advantages, like, you could have Alistair Tenpenny at the very top in a very unique position where he's like sniping people in the wasteland. But the real challenge there was just all the permutations of, do I let the ghouls out? Who do I save? Who don't I? Because we had this goal in Fallout 3 that the player can do anything. If the player wants to kill a quest giver, they can kill a quest giver. We talked about Megaton. If you tell Lucas Sims, the sheriff, that you're going to disarm the bomb, and so you have the good quest, and you shoot him and kill him, but then you disarm the bomb, who rewards you? Right. His little son actually comes up to you like, my dad's dead, but he wanted you to have this.
I don't know why, but I like you, girl.
Every Fallout game, I do what I call a profanity pass, where I go through all the dialogue and I rip out probably 50% of the profanity, because it really doesn't need it. But in the case of Fallout 3 and Little Lamplight, we have the character of Mayor McCready, who we decided we want this kid to be the most foul-mouthed, we were going to throw 80% of the F-bombs on this kid.
Hold it right there, lady. Don't take another step or we'll blow your fucking head off.
And he comes, the voice actor we got, I don't even know what the kid's parents were thinking, but he just did a great job, and it comes across as a kid who's trying to be tough, and he's the mayor, and he's in charge, and oh God, there's little moments like that.
To most kids, that makes me mayor for fucking life. Fine by me, I say.
Fallout 3 was a success for Bethesda Game Studios, and as they moved on to their next Elder Scrolls project, a corporate-level decision was made to make a sequel to Fallout. Fallout New Vegas was made by many of the developers who worked on the original games. The game was put together in 18 months and so launched in a pretty buggy state, but fans generally appreciated the way in which Obsidian evolved the first-person Fallout. They tightened up gun combat, added back in factions, and created a wonderfully immersive world packed full of interesting stories. There aren't many New Vegas posters lining the halls of BGS, and in talking to the team here, it sounds like they weren't overly involved in the production at all.
We were very hands-off with that. We had, I think, it was a corporate level decided that we should do this, and we wanted to support them as best we could. But we knew that they were capable folks and they were doing their own thing. I think we had 1 or 2 meetings with them just to go over some high level stuff and what are the ground rules, what should we be doing. But we were busy working on our own stuff here, so we knew that was one of the things. We knew that, listen, if they're going to do this, we're not going to really have the time to work on it with them because we're doing our own stuff.
How much support did you give Obsidian when it came to New Vegas? Was that very much just their own thing that was going on?
It pretty much was their own. We were pretty knee-deep in Skyrim at that point, and there really wasn't a lot of help that we could give them. Interesting enough, of all the people, I was probably the one who were on the team that worked on New Vegas the most, actually. But they, you know, they did a heck of a job where we literally gave them like this, here is the engine and the tech, Godspeed. And we gave them all the source. Like, it was basically, you know, we gave them all the raw assets, you know, from Fallout 3. Like, here's everything. You know, they gave us a great pitch, a great story, and it was pretty exciting actually to see someone else do their take on it, and it was obviously well received as well. But you know, I thought they did a great job with that game.
The team at BGS has a monthly hands-on meeting where their new studios in Austin and Montreal are dialed in. They begin each meeting with a list of new employees and recognition of their anniversaries.
This is in Montreal. Jason, a year. Sebastian, 1 year. Katya, 4 years. Jared, 4 years. Gerard, 4 years. 5 years, sorry. Gabe's 5 years, and Nate Emmett, 5 years. So a lot of people.
It went on for quite a while, the top Bethesda birthday that month going to quest designer Brian Chappie Chapin, who celebrated 17 years. The average tenure at BGS is pretty high. This has meant that as they've moved from project to project, the team has become more battle-hardened and more trusting of the process through which they make their games. Bethesda has a process. They overlap projects so that as one game is being finished, another is being spun up. They always start their new game with a map. They add new technology to help build the world. Then they write the stories, add in new tentpole ideas, and create strike teams to focus on problematic areas. Crucially, they've gotten better at finishing games and pulling less out of them at the last minute. This is a process that used to terrify the studio, but through experience, they've become a lot more comfortable with.
I don't know, let's say 7-8 months before release, it's a serious mess.
Right.
Always. Hey, we want to push them in this direction, but just things don't click together as much as you want. And then you start shaving. There's tricks you have to nudge the player this way, or hey, let's cut this, or let's change this into this, or let's make this expose itself and become, you know, more of a thing. And then when you ship it, sometimes there's some you miss. You realize like, oh, this is the one everyone's drifting toward, and that wasn't our intention.
3 months before we ship, there's this pocket where things are in the game. You're in alpha, transitions into beta, and the game is done. And like people are like, yeah, this doesn't feel right. It sucks. And you're like, I know, but we always get it. Like we know that it sucks. That's our job at that point, to make it not suck, to make it fun. It's finally the giant block of granite has been delivered to the sculptor. Thank you. It's sitting in there. Now I'm just chiseling away little by little. Just give me a little more time, it's getting there. And at this point, we've been doing it so long, we know it'll get there.
Yeah, I think everyone here, to almost an obsessive level, wants these games to be amazing. We don't like hold back. We're putting everything we possibly can into this game. And that actually is probably our biggest problem. You know, there's a time where we got to realize, okay, this isn't going to be good enough. Maybe we should cut this back or pare this back a little bit. But it's not for a lack of trying. Everyone wants everything in this game, every time. And then the next game, it's, okay, that was great. What can we do now? How can we make this better? We're done. Next, you know, what are we going to do that can blow that one away? No one will ever want to play that game again after they've seen this.
That didn't work for Skyrim.
No, that's good. Our fans are amazing that they, you know, play our games for so long. Having the creation kit and modding be such a big part of Bethesda is just really, really cool. I'll often go look at mods and just can't believe what they've done. Mostly on the visual front, like, oh wow, that's really amazing how they're using some new effects on games, or the teams who will go and try to recreate one of our older games in the newer engine. That's like the biggest, I don't know, praise you could possibly get, is that people want to remake an entire game you worked on in the newer engine just because it'll be a little bit better and cooler, and they want to see what they can do. It's really awesome.
There are a lot of people here on the team, myself included, are huge fans of mods in the modding community. They've been doing it for just as long as we have. The modding community is 15, 18 years old. That's unheard of in the industry. No one, like, there are no fans of, like, not even the Minecraft community is that old. Like, there's nothing like that in the industry. So we're really in a really unique situation.
You know, I talked to Todd a lot about this because it was just kind of Todd and I talking about Skyrim early on. Nobody was working on it. They were still working on Fallout stuff. And we both wanted, he and I somehow align on the ideas of what we want to do in the next Elder Scrolls game. We both wanted something that wasn't sort of the generic fantasy of Oblivion, but wasn't as alien as Morrowind was. So we wanted to do something that had a lot more of the local culture, so we picked the Nords. We were both excited about doing Nords, but wanted to kind of mix in some of the other elements from the other provinces around Skyrim. And then I drew a map, and that kind of helped me figure out, well, what is this game? All right, I'll make a map, and we'll start figuring out where everything goes and what could be in it. And I pulled references for all the different regions, because early on we told the team, hey, yeah, we're gonna be making Skyrim, and everyone was like, is it gonna be all snow? That sounds really boring. So I did a presentation for the whole team that was, well, no, it's not going to be all snow. And plus, there's so many different kinds of snow you don't realize. So we broke apart this sort of Arctic environment into tundra, different types of tundra, volcanic tundra, the more open fields tundra, rocky wastelands on the edges, a snow environment, Arctic glacier environment, and then, you know, forest, make them different. We can have pine forests, we can have, you know, fall forest is what we called it, because we kind of set the tone of the game in the fall.
What it was, it felt that Oblivion had tipped back to being too generic. It's welcoming, right? But it doesn't have, its character just became, I'm the next gen role-playing game in forests. And we needed something that at an instant felt a bit more rugged and had its own identity. And the dragons and the shouting, they work into that.
Fallout 3 had a very tight design. It was we hadn't done factions. It was a smaller game in a lot of ways than even Oblivion, which allowed us to polish. And we knew that with Skyrim, we were gonna go big again.
Skyrim would be the team's fourth bite at their particular brand of open-world role-playing game, and with that confidence came the drive to improve on things that they had done before, to plan better so they had more time to add new flavors to their world.
We'll come up with the basic ideas behind each town or each city and say, all right, these are the people who live here. It's kind of based on, you know, if it's Solitude, it's a heavy Imperial presence, and we want it to be near a port. Come up with some ideas. And then Ray, one of our concept artists, drew that and put it on top of a cliff with an arch over to another rock formation, and everyone was like, oh yeah, all right, this is really cool. This is starting to feel really unique.
The cave kit, we tried to do a lot of different things because I already did the cave kit on Fallout 3, so we tried to branch out and like make them a lot more organic. Because the way we would build them before, it was pretty much Lego pieces and it would all snap together in like 90-degree angles. Caves aren't really 90-degree angles, so we expanded on that and added all these pieces that you can jam in so things can like flow around really natural. Like it's more work for the designers, but then it doesn't just feel like, you know, old school grid RPG thing. So I think it made a big difference and sort of laid the groundwork for what we did on Fallout 4, which went even further.
Whatever way you slice it, one of the elements that defines Bethesda games is bugs. These games, with all their openness, all their interactive objects and emergent storytelling, are rife with bugs. In the past, bug hunting was something that was done by the entire team as they approached launch, but as the studio grew, they were able to put resources into starting a quality assurance department. Now they were hiring people, many of whom were fans of the games, to join their QA department and find bugs for them. And as it turns out, bugs came in all shapes and sizes.
There were some that dealt with menus, and then you would be the person that was just scrolling through menus trying to find typos, trying to find issues with the menus. Then there were the people that had the gameplay access where they were trying to find whether they could run through a wall or whether this collection of spells, if we're using Skyrim as an example, would cause the game to crash. So there were teams that were specifically put on like quest completion and making sure they can get from point A to point B without any issues, just running this specific path. Some would have to divert and do side quests. There were achievement testers that would do the quests or do what they needed to do in order to figure out whether the achievements and trophies were going to pop properly.
Skyrim wasn't the first Bethesda game to ship with bugs, but thanks to capture cards and the growing popularity of YouTube, it was the first to have so many of them immortalized for millions to see. I asked the team about some of their favorites, some you may have seen yourself, and others you probably haven't.
In the DLC for Skyrim, I think it was Dawnguard, there was artwork that was supposed to be a fork and knife. So there's fork and knife, you weren't supposed to be able to pick them up, they were just supposed to be placed on a table. But there are two in the game, still to this day, because they never fixed it, that you could pick up and hold as weapons, and you can enchant them, and you could like decapitate people with like an eating fork and an eating knife. Had a blast doing this, but the bug part of it, and like that part wasn't that big of a deal, but the bug part of it came where if you created a save game and then loaded that game with the fork and knife equipped, it would load you into the artwork somewhere in the game, so like you would just be in the middle of a table place setting.
The game, like when you load back in, makes you the like plate?
Yeah, you're basically the plate, and you're not standing on top of the table, you're standing in the table. Anywhere where there's a fork and knife, if it's in the same load set. So if I'm like in that area and there happens to be somewhere later in the level a fork and knife, it will propel me to where the fork and knife are.
So after Skyrim came out, the first thing, there's videos going up on YouTube of people putting buckets over people's heads in towns.
Welcome to the Pond Prawn. What can I do for you?
You don't look so good. Are you feeling all right?
I have all sorts of interesting items for sale.
Because our system for the AI was literally a line of sight, a pick drawn from the center of the head to whatever they were going for. You put a bucket on the head, they couldn't see you anymore, right? No one thought to do that. All our QA, all the hundreds of hours, thousands, tens of hundreds of thousands of hours we collectively played that game.
The giants would launch like characters into the sky, and I didn't know that the bear was being launched. Every once in a while you would see like, you'd be playing Skyrim before we released, and you're like running around, and you would just see a mammoth like fly up in the air, and you'd see it like drop, and you're like, what the hell is going on? Like what? Little by little, and then I started asking the animator who animated the giant, I'm like, dude, are you seeing like flying mammoths? Like what's happening? Something will aggro the giant. The giant will then hit the pound, and because they're always paired with the mammoths, they send them in the air. But I never saw the bear until we released. And so then the game released, and then suddenly this whole thing where my bear was being launched across the map, and then obviously spawned like that fan video of like that, bear that keeps flying around and all that.
Attack bear, please attack bear. Yes! Oh!
As much as we all enjoy a good flying bear, bugs weren't the only element of Skyrim to be immortalized by internet culture. Emil is responsible for so much of what makes these games special. He's written all the Dark Brotherhood questlines. He helped design every lockpicking game Bethesda has ever worked on. He even wrote an entire arena combat mode for Skyrim, with arenas in every cities, just like the original concept for Oblivion. But just like that, it didn't make it in. But despite all of his work on all of these elements, the thing that Emil is probably most famous for is a single line of guard dialogue that he wrote in about 5 seconds.
Yeah, so, and again, I was Dark Brotherhood, guard dialogue.
Are you responsible for arrow in the knee then? Is that what you're telling me?
I am, actually. That's the weirdest thing ever. But yeah, it's just, it was one line of dialogue and a stack of 100, I don't know, like the guys say a bunch of stuff. And for some reason, could never have foretold, to this day, I still don't know why. There you have it. Yeah, so weird.
You presumably you wrote it just like one late night. It was like
yeah, I was just writing a stack of them, a bunch of randomized lines. Like, I used to be an adventurer like you, arrow in the knee, hey, I saw a horker down there, whatever. Like, it wasn't dead, didn't give it a second thought. Like, you're just trying to get into the mindset of what these guys would.
I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee.
Something else Emil worked on was the dragon language. The team had wanted to put believable dragons into a 3D Elder Scrolls game since forever, and now that they finally had the technology to do it, they wanted it to be an integral part of the main quest.
I don't know if this has ever come out, but one of the biggest inspirations for the shouts is actually the power of the voice in the Dune movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Muad'Dib, yeah. Because they have that device, and like, it blows up the rock. There's a sort of cadence to it, like, because each shout is a maximum of 3 words, and so like, if you find 1 word, it's an exhale, like foos. If there's 2 words, it's an inhale, then an exhale. It's like foos ro, and then if it's like foos ro da, and then like, and so getting that pattern and that sort of, it feels a little bit musical, but you feel the power behind it, and then coming up with all the shouts and stuff.
For Fallout 4, the team had put together a strike team to figure out how VATS combat could work, and for Skyrim, there were a bunch of strike teams too. One of them ran for the entire length of the game's development, as it was responsible for one of the most important parts of the game, the dragons.
They're very special because they have to, if you think about like draw distance, right? In games, you want to be efficient about, okay, when can I unload something, or when can I deal with the memory issues? But the dragon, you expect to see the dragon from as far as your eye can see, right? Because you can go wherever your eye can see. So he's basically like loaded all the time. And he's costly. He's has the most bones. He has the most dense mesh. Like, if you think about it, like he's a heavy character.
Dragons were tough in multiple ways. Just how do they work? Just with the way the games work and the way we build the worlds. It's very sort of cell-based, because technically it has to load a certain number of cells and a certain number of actors. And so the technical aspect of, well, here's this thing that's in the sky that can go wherever it wants. How does that work? How does it work within the game world for the player? And then once it's within your space, how do you actually fight it?
Right.
So fighting it in the air, if you're shooting spells at it, when it's on the ground. So I remember we basically had a strike team, and it was one of those things where the whole game from the beginning to the end, we were working on dragons. Just sort of how to, can we do this? And then once we got to a point where it's like, yes, we can make this work. And then, okay, what do we do? What don't we do? Yeah, like the quest wasn't work. Like, where's the dragon? It's over here. There's a bunch of sheep it just killed. Somebody go back and debug it, and like, where's the dragon? Because it uses radiant AI, so it would go off on its own and do its own thing.
Skyrim was a massive commercial and critical success. It became one of the most modded games of all time, spawned a huge community of both young and old, and has since been released on practically every console known to man. Something the team laughs about themselves, referring to Skyrim as the game that will never die. But the success the game enjoyed was a surprise to most of them.
I would have never guessed how that game would be as popular and did do as well as it did. We knew it was a fun game. We knew it was awesome. Like, I knew playing it, 6 months, I'm like, I think we have something here, but I don't want to say it out loud because I don't want to jinx it. And yeah, and that would have been, so for the designers, that would have been their like 3rd game now. Like, right. So that's practically unheard of in the industry for a team to be together for that long at that point. Started with Morrowind, and then Oblivion, and then Fallout 3. Now we're going to do it for a 4th time. And it's one of the advantages that we have because of our history and all the games that we've worked on. We can track, hey, how are we doing now compared to where we were on this project with Fallout 4? How do we compare versus Skyrim? How do we compare versus all the other ones? And that's sort of another advantage that we have, in the industry, is that we have all these games and experiences, and I call them playbooks. Like, we have the Skyrim playbook. How do we solve this problem in Skyrim? How do we solve this problem in Fallout 4? Like, we need a new game mechanic. Okay, great. We have 15 years worth. Pick one. Like, which one do you want to try? Like.
The first thing is for us is figure out where the hell is this game set. And it wasn't Boston originally. And it was really, I grew up in Boston, and I thought it would be a great, but I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want to push for it, so I'm like, it was set somewhere else, and I still have a design doc in my desk, original design doc. And in that design doc, the one holdover is the character of Nick Valentine was conceived even way back then. He was like the first character they came up with.
Emil's design doc focusing on a New York-based Fallout was one idea that the leads were floating around. They could place this game anywhere. In fact, at one stage they had asked Obsidian to remove a line in New Vegas about San Francisco being totally wiped off the map. They wanted the Bay Area to at least be an option for future games. The idea for Boston actually came from a lunch meeting between Istvan Pele, Todd Howard, and Emil, and once Beantown was given the thumbs up, Emil headed home with his camera.
I had a friend of mine who was a MIT, so the Institute is MIT, obviously, right? CIT in the game. But I had a friend who was an MIT cop who he drove me around, gave me a little tour, and he said, hey, I don't know if you knew this, but it's an open campus. It was in the summer. And he's like, the campus is open. You can walk around. You can walk through the classrooms and walk anywhere. And you know the whole cryo hook with Fallout 4, I was wandering on this side tunnel down this corridor at MIT. There's this cryo lab with these giant cryo tanks. And I sent these like selfies and sent them to Todd. I'm like, it was pretty fun. I was like, and then I knew back then like the story just started to take on a life of its own.
I had friends that lived there, and so we like toured around the city, and I was taking tons and tons of pictures, which should have been a red flag to them. But then the extra big red flag should have been like, and then we're gonna go and check out Fenway Park. That was designed to be that way from the start. Like that was the very first thing I worked on Fallout 4 was starting out building Fenway. And from the beginning, we knew we wanted like those stadium lights, and we knew the player was gonna have like their first quest pointing towards that. So I always wanted this beacon, and I always like to build worlds in a way where you have like these landmarks that you can help orient yourself with too. That way you don't have to like pull up the map all the time, like where the hell am I? You can just navigate using what you see.
My childhood bedroom is in the game, my high school is in the game. A raider boss named Bosco, he has a bear. So it was the Don Bosco Bears was my mascot back in high school, so goofy stuff like that, yeah. Fenway Park, well, I mean, you know, Diamond City. We knew that there were the big things that we had to have. You have this quest to get paint for the wall, and you can repaint the wall blue or yellow. And I was like, which is the most sacrilegious thing you could possibly do. I was like, we gotta do this. But it was great. Boston Common in the public garden, and the swan boats are big, and that's why we have Swan, the super mutant, the behemoth. The Old North Church, we knew that that had to be, you know, a significant place. The Old State House, which is where the Good Neighbor is. The name Good Neighbor comes from Holly Goodneighbor, who was one of the last burlesque dancers in Boston. So Good Neighbor is in an area that was once Scully Square, which was the original red light district of Boston.
2011, I think, there was the earliest versions of that, drawing out how we wanted the market laid out and stuff, and I actually laid that out myself, and one of the things I wanted was I knew players were going to be going there all the time, because you're always selling things in games, and sometimes people lay out a city and it's like, the clothing shop is over there, the weapon shop is over there. I was like, that is super annoying and takes like 30 hours of additional time in your game, just like running back and forth between those shops. So I was like, let's take all the shops and we put them right here in the middle, so you can just buy and sell everything right there.
Fallout 4, I think for us, was the first time we really handled a giant city in a much better way, technically and artistically. It was really hard to jam everything we wanted to into a city, make sure you didn't get lost, and make sure it ran well and was fun. That was quite a lot of work went into figuring out how to build the downtown city of Boston.
We had like key colors that popped out where there was like a certain color of rust and this certain red and a certain blue that you'll see used on everything. Like the high-tech buildings will have the same blue as the cars, and those were very conscious choices that we had. We just wanted sort of these accent colors, so you would know where like important things are. So you'd have sort of the background of the terrain and ruined stuff as a certain color, but then you'd get these just pops of color to make it feel a little bit more alive while still being trashed and crappy. Color and lighting have a lot of similarities to where I think of it as like mothing the player. They like see something and just go towards it.
Yeah, that was intentional. Istvan really wanted to say, here are these bright colors, and when I see that, I know I'm gonna go find something that's interesting. That's gonna lead me through this dead wasteland that we're in and just be kind of a guide for the player.
The location for a Bethesda role-playing game is always a point of interest, but in the case of Fallout 4, many of us had heard that it was set in Boston years before the game was released. In December of 2013, a Kotaku article revealed the location to be Boston, referencing a voiceover script that had been leaked to their news desk. Communications between the studio and the outlet have been frosty ever since, but I wanted to know how the studio reacted when they first saw the report.
There were some small ones, but nothing really bad. There was some VO script leaks. That wasn't pleasant. You know, I was separate story where literally the first time I saw those documents is when they were emailed to me from somebody outside the company. And then you're like, what is this? Where's this coming from? But you know what? I think you got to let that kind of, roll off the shoulders pretty quickly. Like, we have enough to do to worry about that stuff, and there's so much going on that the fact that more doesn't leak, like in general, not just us but other people, is kind of surprising.
That was pretty was surprising, and obviously we tried to track it down and figure out what happened, and that was and that also kind of told us, like, if you're going to obfuscate stuff related to Fallout, you really have to hide it. You can't simply just give it a code name and call it a day. Like, if you look at the thing, you're like, oh, this is a Fallout game.
Bethesda Game Studios continued to grow, expanding departments with a focus on improving the general production quality of their games. Technical artists were hired to create bespoke tools for the team. Dedicated animators helped to create more complex rigs. They added cinematic cameras to dialogue, upgraded the animation system, and even sharpened up the shooting.
We really, I feel like what happened was that with Havoc animation in particular, when we integrated that into our system, I think Fallout 4 was the beginning of us really catching a groove with that. Like, there's a certain time when you start to learn a new tool. When we adopted Havoc, there's a time where you're trying to learn it. So we did that during Skyrim. But I think when we hit Fallout 4, we knew it well enough where you're not fighting the tool so much, and you're much more in the realm of creating the art, right? I started on Dogmeat and kind of did pre-production on Dogmeat, and then I passed it on to someone else who actually did an amazing job with it. And then I stayed primarily on like scenes, directing any actors that we had for mocap, and focusing on faces. We spend so much time talking in our games, and it's the area that I feel like we continually need to push. I did a lot of the mocap. I was also the actor for most of the mocap.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so like the salesman, when he first comes in, like that's I did all his stuff. I shot the cryopod, the infamous cryopod scene where the Conjurer was shooting, the spouse. That we did with a couple people here. Yeah, we have like a mocap stage, and I just go downstairs and just shoot it. And I get in the suit, I play the audio, and I try to perform to the people's performance, or I grab somebody else and say, hey, I need your help, let's go shoot.
It's funny that I grew up with the kid, Jay Giannone, who the last time I saw him in person, we were in a fight.
Right.
Me and him and his friends were against me, and it was like it was like this like bully nerd situation. Did not end in a good way. And I had known that Jay throughout the years he had gone on to be an actor, and he'd been in some stuff, and I was like, and I liked the things he'd been in. So I reached out to him like, hey man, like, how's it going? I know you're an actor. Do you want to like be in the game? And so he does the voice. He does a couple of voices in the game.
Before each project, Bethesda hosts a game jam where they invite everyone in the studio to prototype something for a new or existing game. It can be anything, big or small. For instance, one of the producers learned how to animate cats during one game jam. Those animations are used in Fallout 4. Another game jam gem came from physics programmer Mike Delaney. He knocked together a system that allowed players to build and furnish their own bases. This system, Workshops, ended up being one of the tentpole features of Fallout 4, but the truth is that it almost didn't make it into the final game.
The workshop mode in Fallout was on the cutting block for so long. We're like, I don't know if anyone really wants to do this. It's kind of fun though. Well, I guess we'll just kind of keep it in there. And it was always like it just refused to die because we just weren't sure, like, does anyone even care about this? And it turned out to be huge. Like, there's a contingent of fans who hate it, and there's a contingent of hardcore fans who absolutely adore it.
Workshop was the easiest thing for us to cut because we were always so afraid of it. Not afraid is the wrong word. It was ancillary to the rest of the game. It was a side thing. So we kept it there because it was such an ambitious endeavor. Like, it became part of the quests towards the end. Certain quests you had to do it. But we could have easily, had we known and invest more time, and it could have been like a big part of the main quest, to rebuild a town or something. One of our physics programmers, Mike Delaney, sat there and was like, I did this thing, and you can trick lights and turn lights on and wheel the objects around, and then Todd saw that and was like, well, you get to do that for the rest of the some parts of the rest of the project. And they built and built and built.
One of the conspiracy theories that fans of BGS games love to talk about is the idea that these games all exist in one universe. The way in which the studio creates these games in series means that there are always elements of Elder Scrolls games being brought into the Fallout games, and vice versa. But one of the most exciting crossovers ever was actually left on the cutting room floor. It involved the town of Salem, Massachusetts, and a bunch of magic kids.
In the real world, there's a city of Salem, there's another town of Danvers, and there's a rivalry between those two towns with like the high school teams, with like the Danvers soccer team and the Salem soccer team. So we decided, let's do a little bit of a rivalry between Danvers and Salem in the game. We were like, okay, what is the theme of Salem? It's witches, all right? And so what if we have people with mutations that have weird powers? They're kind of X-Men-ish, but like they're caused by radiation, but they're viewed as witches by the people of Danvers. So there's this sort of like, they're being persecuted somehow. We'll get that witch theme. We were using the Skyrim code base, which had magic built in. So we had, all right, fireballs and telekinesis or whatever. Well, you know, eventually as we got deeper into Fallout 4's development, that code got ripped out. And so we're like, we don't have this magic stuff anymore. There are no more fireballs. You can't like, oh, great. So long story short, that quest had gone through, I want to say, 4 or 5 variations and 4 or 5 designers. And it was this close to getting cut. And one of the issues was because our world is compressed, right? Danvers ended up being right next to Salem. And it was so close, we ended up combining the two. And so there were no two towns that could compete against each other. So we had to like, what do? We know we have this museum. And then Liam Collins, one of our designers, he was like, I think one of our newest quest designers at the time, he was given this quest. He was like, we gotta do something with it. I don't wanna lose it. I want there to be a quest there. What can we do? And we work together. And it's one of the coolest quests in the game. And it's such a cool, it has a totally different vibe. It's basically like, what do you do if you have a death claw that's trapped in a building and trying to escape from it? And do some really cool scripted sequences. And like, we know we can trim it. Are we gonna trim it out of existence? Is it still gonna be fun? And it is. We just had to change the nature of it.
If the team was simplifying quests in some areas, they were making them far more complex in others. Fallout 3 didn't have faction quests. The team decided to scrub them out to make time for other systems that needed building. The system had been reintroduced in Fallout New Vegas, with faction alliances having some impact over the endgame. So when it came for BGS to start Fallout 4, they decided to make factions an integral part of the entire Fallout experience.
In Fallout 4, there was a design decision to make all the factions interwoven into the main story. We did not do that in previous games, and it kept things simpler. But you often felt like, hey, I played the Mages Guild in Skyrim, and they didn't particularly care that dragons were attacking the whole world. But in this game, all the stories kind of combined around the synth threat. It made things vastly, vastly more complicated.
Oh my God, I joined the Railroad, but I want to kill synths, but then I do this over here, but then I join the Brotherhood of Steel, and I have Dance as a companion, but then I also want to have Strong, and then it's mind-boggling.
And it worked out really well in that each faction got their own group of people to work on things, so they got ownership of it and got to kind of run with it. So even though the Brotherhood of Steel is a little bit evil, I particularly enjoyed that.
From my perspective, Fallout 4 is our most accomplished title to date. Like, that game was playable far earlier than any other game we've had. We were playtesting it far earlier. We had all our processes and tools and technology, and it was pretty rock solid.
What are some of the things that you're most proud of?
I think there's a camaraderie and there's a shared history that when you go to that meeting and you see that up there, there's a sense of pride that, like, I can go through a list of like, yeah, I've worked with that guy for 20 years and this person for 18 years and 16 years and enough of us, where these are the games we would run out to buy. Like, we really enjoy the games. More so, we enjoy doing it with each other. And if we didn't, we wouldn't still all be here doing it. I think it's a lot of work. I've spent more time with the Elder Scrolls and Fallout, or even just the Elder Scrolls, than anything in my entire life. Like anything. My family, for better, like if you count up the hours. And that has to mean something to everybody, or we won't, we'll do below average work, or people will move on, or it's just a job. But there's a certain vibe in the studio that I think a lot of us get a sense of. I don't know if you're coming in, I don't know if you do or don't, you're spending limited time. It's sort of that thing like, you can do something, but if you do it with other people, it's just far more meaningful, right? And it's like, we're always trying to do too much, or like, have we bitten off more than we can chew? Of course, like that's who we are. And we won't always get like all the way there, but I'd rather shoot for it and then see where we end up than be safe.
Thank you for joining us on our journey through the history of Bethesda Game Studios. And now that we've suitably indulged our nostalgia, it's time to look forward towards an exciting future.
In our next documentary, we talk to the people working on Bethesda's future as we explore the design of Fallout 76 and give you an exclusive window into the studio's lofty plans.
So we'll catch up after Bethesda's E3 showcase for an exciting behind-the-scenes deep dive into the new games this studio has been working on. Enjoy the show.